We will not get a better picture of how times change than the spec we're about to look at today. Because even just a few weeks ago, we had the point when we were talking about the state of the specs in Mythic Plus, where, for example, we were pointing out the powerful state Frost Mage was in. After the changes it received and the damage it was doing, it was amongst the more popular of the specs in Mythic Plus and the better performing. And we were pointing out, you know, Arcane Mages were on strike. They did not like at all the state of Arcane. Apparently, they considered an insult to turn Arcane Explosion from an instant cast ability to a casted spell, and Arcane was very lowly played. However, if you look at the situation right now, Arcane went from being slightly right below Fire Mage to progressively gaining ground and getting closer and closer to Frost as one of the better performing and most popular ranged DPS specs in Mythic Plus. Even if you are to look at the performance of the specs in the past couple of weeks in Mythic Plus, you can see even just the average top damage results of a Frost Mage, when you compare them to the average top results of an Arcane Mage in essentially the same keys, in the same key range, you will see that the damage is very, very similar, even if sometimes you end up finding them within the very same key. Arcane Mage is now doing significantly better and is now one of the better performing specs. But that's not all, because while Frost Mage is doing very well in Mythic Plus, their performance in pure single target and in just raid encounters in general, as we have seen from the latest raid testing, you can see from said raid testing that Arcane not only is now starting to match Frost in Mythic Plus, but it's also vastly better when it comes to single target, as that is not really the specialty of the new shatter mechanic of Frost. So now we get to look for today at the state of Arcane. What changed with Arcane, both what changed from the War Within and what changed from the beginning of the beta or the alpha, and why they were so underplayed and weak compared to what has changed now. So for the most recent change, this is a bit more easy to explain, is this one. The most recent surge in popularity is because a couple of balance tuning changes, balance tuning passes ago, this happened, which was more or less a flat 20% damage buff to Arcane. All of your main abilities were buffed by 20%, and Arcane Barrage itself was buffed by a whooping 40%. That buff alone is responsible for like a 15% damage increase, just the buff to Arcane Barrage. So the first part is easy to explain. They just received a massive damage boost a couple of weeks ago, and that's about it. Now, as for what changed, yes, we have to point out how the spec, like we have done for many specs before, has been simplified. Quite a few of the tools which made the spec a bit more complicated in the War Within, a few more things to track, down to even needing weak auras to tell you when was the right time to cast an Arcane Barrage, because you have so many cogs and wheels turning in your spec, so many buffs and procs turning that you just assigned the thinking to a weak aura. So something like Ether Attunement. Every 3 clear castings, your next Arcane Missiles does double damage. This is gone. You don't have to keep track of your clear casting counts anymore. You have Impetus, remembering to use Arcane Blast when you are at full charges because you wanted the 10% arcane damage buff for 10 seconds before you went into your burst windows. This is also gone. You don't have to keep track of this anymore. Nether Precision, the multiple times change the main base passive of your entire spec, is gone. You don't have to juggle your clear casting Arcane Missiles into Arcane Blasts or Arcane Barrages. You don't have to think about spell queuing and double benefiting from this buff as it was in the past. This is all gone completely. You also have Intuition, your 5% RNG to make your next Arcane Barrage deal more damage and get to full charges again. It's also gone. This very tiny RNG. You also had other minor passives which are not gone, but they have been significantly improved in their RNG, so they feel better to play with. For example, Orb Barrage, the chance to get you to spawn a full orb for free, only used to have a 10% chance per arcane charge, so even at full arcane charges was a 40% chance. Now, it's a 4% chance per stack of Arcane Salvo, which stacks up to 20 times, so it's an 80% chance at max. And if you're playing some Fury, which you are, Salvo stacks up to 25, so at full stacks this is a 100% chance to generate an orb barrage, not a 40% chance like in live. Another one is high voltage, much better improved. The current version in live of high voltage, also likely why you don't play with this talent, only gave you a 10% chance per missile to give you one charge. And you cast 5 missiles right now in live. So you went from having a 10% chance per missile for 5 missiles to having a 50% chance per missile for 7 missiles. So in live, on average, this was giving you 1 arcane charge. In the beta, this one is currently giving you 3 to 4 charges. So the RNG has improved significantly from the War Within's version. This is pretty much the TLDR of the changes. There has been many QL additions to streamline these amount of procs and buffs and things you have to keep track of, low chance RNG effects, which have all been increased significantly to make them easier to, first of all, easier to proc, and also feeling more satisfying to know that when you have your clear casting and when you have your arcane missiles, you have a very high chance of getting full arcane charges compared to the low RNG chance of before. Just look at all of the cascade of effects generated by a single arcane missiles currently in the War Within. Casting arcane missiles consumes clear casting, which means nether precision is procced. But because you're casting arcane missiles, you also get your arcane harmony stacks. And then, because you have consumed the clear casting stacks and activated nether precision, you will create dematerialize damage. And because you have created dematerialize damage from arcane missiles, you have energy reconstitution, the extra AoE procs you get from that button. Don't forget intuition, because casting a damaging spell, which includes arcane missiles, still has the chance to give you the arcane barrage, damage increase, and arcane charges. And don't forget Late Drinker, because consuming clear casting has a 40% chance to make your next arcane blast echo for more damage. And all of this was just cascading off of a single cast of arcane missiles. These were all things that were happening at the same time as arcane missiles itself. In Midnight's beta, for example, when you cast arcane missiles, you do have the revisited version of Arcane Harmony, now called Arcane Salvo, right? You have Focusing Crystal, which still works within Arcane Missiles itself. It's just more chances to give you Arcane Salvo stacks. You have High Voltage, which is more chances to give you Arcane Charges. And you have Overpowered Missiles, which is casting a missile as a chance to make your next missile do even more damage and give you full stacks of Arcane Salvos. So, from the War Within to the beta, you have essentially eliminated all of this cascade of other effects also interacting with other multiple buttons like your Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage to be much fewer and be much more contained within Arcane Missiles itself and within your new base passive of the spec, which is your Arcane Salvos. That's essentially the major TLDR of Arcane, how more it has been simplified and streamlined with fewer things to keep track of and a much more smooth rotation. Now, this is of course an asterisk because there must have certainly been players enjoying either some of the previous versions of Arcane being a bit more complex and having to track a few more things. But the gist of it is that now, as a new Arcane, whenever you cast your Arcane Blast, because thanks to Expanded Mind, Arcane Blast now also gives you 2 stacks of Arcane Salvo. So when you cast Arcane Blast, you gain 2 stacks of Salvo. When you cast Missiles, you gain 7 stacks of Salvo. And because you are playing with Focusing Crystal, you have a 50% chance per missile to generate 1 more stack of Salvo. So instead of generating 7, you will generate 10 to 11 stacks. So your playstyle will now be juggling between how many Arcane Blasts or Arcane Missiles do I cast before I empty the barrel, I empty my stacks of Salvo with my empowered Arcane Barrage. Do I simply do Blast, Blast, Barrage, Blast, Blast, Barrage every time? Because now Arcane Blast also gives you 2 Arcane Charges thanks to the new reworked impetus. So you always generate 2 charges with Arcane Blast. So you can just do Arcane Blast for 2 charges, Arcane Blast for 2 more charges, and then Barrage, because you have 4. Casting 2 Arcane Blasts also give you 4 stacks of Arcane Salvo, so you generate 4 stacks and you consume them. Or you can keep going higher. You can cast multiple Arcane Blasts to get more stacks of Salvo before you empty them with Arcane Barrage. And what happens when you have the clear casting procs and you have Arcane Missiles available? Now that you know that this proc can give you upwards of 10 plus Arcane Salvo stacks, what do? Do you do Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast, Arcane Barrage, and then Missiles, and then Arcane Barrage immediately after? Or do you use Arcane Missiles after the 2 blasts to stack even more Arcane Salvos before you get to use your Arcane Barrage? That is gonna be essentially the minigame you are going to be playing as Arcane. Playing around your salvo stacks and how and when do you want to use your Arcane Missiles, which are now significantly empowered, not just because of the damage they do, because Arcane Missiles does do a lot of damage. They actually normally out-damage your own Arcane Barrage, not just because of the base damage, but also because of the super powerful new talent added in the beta, Overpowered Missiles, which is exactly that, overpowered missiles. That's sort of the minigame you are at. When to maximize the use of your Arcane Barrage based on the stacks of Arcane Salvo that you have, because these do a lot of damage, right? Because you will be playing with Arcane Singularity, which buffs your damage increase of your barrage per stack. Instead of 3% per stack, it becomes a 7% per stack, which means that 20 stacks, it's a 140% damage increase of your Arcane Barrage. So it's a massive damage boost to get these salvo stacks up. So it could be normal to see something like this. You cast 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different Arcane Blasts, which is 10 stacks of salvo before casting Arcane Barrage, and then for the next one you cast Missiles, which is some 10 stacks of salvo, and then you cast 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Arcane Blasts, which is 14 stacks of salvo. So between the Missiles and the salvo you go up to almost 25 stacks, and then your Arcane Barrage. Or you could be doing the short version. You do Missiles, a single blast and barrage, and then you only cast 3 blasts for a barrage, which is only 6 stacks of salvo, and then you cast 3 more blasts, which is again 6 stacks of salvo before your Arcane Barrage. That's the one benefit, especially if you're playing Sun Fury, because you're playing with Glorious Incandescence, your meteors, which require you to have at least 5 stacks of salvos. So the idea of doing Blast, Blast, Barrage would only generate 4 stacks of salvo, but this talent wants you to have at least 5. So you want to do Blast, Blast, Blast to guarantee you have at least 6, so that this procs and you do more meteor damage. This is mostly though in single target, because in AoE you will be flooding with quite a few more in fact, clear casting procs, which means that you will have way more Arcane Missiles casts, way more Arcane Barrage casts, and way smaller amount of times where you have to spam multiple Arcane Blasts on multiple target counts. You can see the difference here in the amount of casts of an Arcane Mage during bosses, where it's way more Arcane Blast casts, way more stacks of your salvos going up and capitalizing on way larger stacks of your salvos with your Arcane Barrages, and then the Trash casts, where Arcane Barrage takes over your Arcane Blast. Also because you're helped greatly from your Arcane Orb in Mythic Plus in Trash packs, since Arcane Orb gives you 1 charge every time it deals damage. If you have at least 4 enemies every time Arcane Orb is launched, it's a guaranteed full set of Arcane charges. And because, as we mentioned, your new Orb Barrage talent can almost guarantee you can spawn one when you cast Arcane Barrage at close to full stacks of salvo, you know that when you're casting a barrage at full stacks, you will also be generating full stacks of Arcane charges, because your Arcane Orb will spawn, will hit the Trash pack with 4 mobs or more, which will mean full Arcane charges again. So it's another Arcane Barrage, fewer casts of Arcane Blast. So you will not have as much space for you to be casting Arcane Blast in AoE, in Mythic Plus, Trash packs. Your cooldown is still only 2. You have the very simple 90-45 split, where Arcane Surge has a 90-second cooldown and Touch of the Magi has a 45-second cooldown. So you just do 1 set of cooldowns together, and then just Touch of the Magi, and then back both of them together. You do have somewhat of an awkward situation where the much stronger part of our Arcane Surge isn't even the cooldown itself, is what you get from Sun Fury, which is Arcane Soul. Especially in AoE, when you don't get that much value from spamming Arcane Blast in like 10 mobs when you use Arcane Surge. Even if you gain 35% more spell damage during the window, what becomes much stronger is when it ends, you gain Arcane Soul. So you gain a full Arcane Charge, spammable Arcane Barrage. On top of the fact that when you're spamming those Arcane Barrages inside of Arcane Soul, Arcane Barrage does not consume Arcane Salvo. which means you can get up to 15, 20, 25 stacks of Arcane Salvo, keep casting Arcane Barrages with those high Salvo stacks, with those orbs being spawned for free, because the Salvos are not resetting inside of Arcane Soul. So at the moment, it's very lopsided, your cooldown. It's much stronger at the end, basically, of the cooldown itself, rather than the actual cooldown. Touch of the Magi, though, has been made much stronger, because that's where your Apex talents come in. Your Touch of the Archmage is already making your damage increase on one target. The target of the Touch of the Magi is stronger. The Apex talent in the middle is just a balancing one. It just gives you flat out more damage, doesn't really have anything to do with your Apex talent itself. The last one, though, Touch of the Archmage, essentially doubles the damage of Touch of the Magi by creating a second touch. It just leaves behind a Touch of the Magi for 6 seconds to do 50% of the damage you did from Touch of the Magi, with double damage on the initial target of your Touch of the Magi. This is very good, because one of the niches, one of the power tools of Arcane, which made them meta in Mythic Plus, was the Prio damage they could do in Mythic Plus. The fact that they could target one guy and do way more damage to that one guy, even when they were in AoE. Even if they were hitting technically 10 mobs, the one they were targeting, they were able to do more damage to them because of Arcane Barrage. As you know, Arcane Cleave, your Arcane Barrage talent, for each Arcane Charge, Arcane Barrage hits one additional nearby target. That's what made Arcane Barrage AoE. But the thing is, Arcane Barrage by default still does way more damage to its primary target than it does to the rest of the enemies. So yes, Arcane Cleave will hit everyone around for 40% of the damage of Arcane Barrage. But the full damage of Arcane Barrage is going to one target, is going to your target, which is very good for Prio damage. You can even see it very easily in here when you go into Magister's Terrace and you pull the big Arcane Sentry, mega HP kind of mob early on in this dungeon, and the Prio damage to this mob was easily done by the Arcane Mage, mostly because of Arcane Barrage. And this is very important to point out, that this feature has remained, even after these changes, has remained in Midnight, because it is one of those things that can make you meta in Mythic Plus. Having this kind of specific damage profile is being carried over from the War Within to Midnight. You still have very good Prio damage in Mythic Plus when it comes to AoE packs, which is very, very valuable as a tool to have in Mythic Plus. All in all, it has been a victory for the changes to Arcane Mage. Many of these have simplified the spec, but in a good way. Not in a survival hunter way, not in a elemental shaman way. Many of the simplifications here were due to your passive interactions, which are now just overall flat out better. Either because their RNG chance is much more easy to win that RNG when the chance goes from 5% to 50%, or from 40% to 80%. It just feels better to play with it, as well as a few of the procs being much more powerful now when they do happen, like Overpowered Missile is a very big thing, not because of the double damage plus AoE feature of Arcane Missiles, but also because it gives you full stacks of Arcane Salvo, which is massive. Also, overall, this is very, very good. Now, the problems. Now, problem number one, Arcane Pulse is still meh. You know, it's still hard to convince Arcane Mages to actually play with this button, especially because, as we have just seen in Mythic Plus, in AoE, you don't even have nearly as much time to be pressing Arcane Blast to begin with, and then adding a talent as an extra button to press in AoE at the cost of a talent point, maybe even 2 talent points if you want to strengthen this button, is kind of weird at the moment. So it's not finding nearly as much play, and when I say nearly as much, I mean practically 0 play. And the other issue is Sun Fury. Even if Spell Slinger has been buffed a couple of weeks ago, it has been to no effect at the moment. Arcane Mages are not playing with Spell Slinger. Sun Fury at the moment is far too strong, and not even because of the 5 extra stacks to your Arcane Salvo, mostly just because of the Arcane Soul and because of your extra power up in that window. It is way too powerful at the moment compared to anything that Spellslinger can offer you. So that's the other issue, I guess, in terms of viability of the 2 different hero talents for Arcane Mage. But with this out of the way, though, the situation is looking very good for Arcane Mage. Of course, won't be seen as a surprise at the moment that not just one Mage is amongst the best performers in the beta. We have 2 different Mage specs amongst the best ones in the beta. But For today though, still in these festive times, this is what we have for the recap of specs in the Midnight Beta after we have gone through Arcane Mage as well. So, with this being said and done with, it is now time to say our goodbyes. We're starting by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free, by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, oh man, on one hand I was a bit surprised and happy I was able to sleep 10 hours in a row. On the other hand, I woke up with a neck pain like there is no tomorrow.